Meanwhile, Huawei says it's waiting for direction from the U.S. Department of Commerce on whether it can use Google's Android system in its new range of smartphones. This comes, of course, as President Trump seemed to soften his stance on Huawei, saying that he would allow U.S. firms to sell products to the Chinese telecom giant. Now, Steve and I are joined around the desk by Florida Republican Senator Rick Scott. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, sir. I want to pick up on the back of those comments around Huawei. President Trump seems to have softened his stance toward Huawei in this weekend's meeting at the G20. What do you think of that move?
Well, I don't think anything's going to change about them selling technology in the United States. It's a national security issue. I mean, I think it's great that the president has a good relationship with President Xi, and we're having this conversation about getting a trade deal done, which I think will be very difficult to do. But with Huawei, it's a national security issue, and I don't think there's any question they're not going to be able to sell into the American market.
You've had some pretty strong comments on China, and they're mentioning that it is a national security risk in your view, but you've said that they are the greatest political foe we have as the U.S. If the Chinese stipulate that Huawei has to be part of a trade deal, do you think that President Trump should say, okay, we're going to raise tariffs, a trade deal is off on that basis, given what a security risk it is?
First off, I don't believe there'll be a deal. Second, I mean, think about this. They're still in technology. They negotiate a deal, then walks back. How many times do you do a deal, negotiate a deal, somebody walks back, and the deal ever closes? But they're still in technology. They won't open up their market. They're militarizing the South China Sea. They're involved in Venezuela, where Maduro is killing his own citizen, just killed a Navy captain. So I don't believe there'll be a deal, but clearly there's no way that we're going to allow Huawei to sell into the American market from a national security standpoint.
So if we don't get a deal, how do you see it playing out, given the majority of the analyst community sees the tariffs as hurting the U.S. economy, hurting U.S. consumers and businesses? Isn't that going to just continue if we don't get resolution?
Well, look, I would rather have a deal. I think we'd all rather have a deal. But China's got to stop and decide they're going to be fair, and they haven't been willing to do that yet. So will it have a short-term impact? Yes, but long-term, I think there's plenty of markets around the world. There's plenty of American companies that are going to prosper with the tariffs.
Senator, you have been quoted on various occasions saying China's not our friend. More recently, they are an adversary. They are our greatest geopolitical foe. Do you think the president is spending too much time trying to be best friends or good friends with traditional enemies, people like Mr. Kim, like Mr. Putin, like Mr. Xi, and not enough time building up alliances?
Well, I think you have to do all of the above. I think, look, here's a positive. We're having a conversation with North Korea. That's a positive. We do have to get them to stop the nuclear expansion, right? That's one. With President Xi, he's got to start acting responsibly. He can't be involved in Venezuela. Open your markets. Don't steal technology. So it's great that the president has a relationship, but we got to hold him accountable. Sure. With President Putin, he's also involved in Venezuela. He's involved in Syria. He's not being our friend. So it's great that he has a relationship, but he's got to stand up for American values, which I think the president will.
But I mean, let me put it bluntly, whether the president is meeting the Queen of England or standing in the DMZ with Mr. Kim or having handshakes with Mr. Xi, these aren't creating deals. These aren't creating better environment for Americans as well. Again, is it too much about the photo op, and is it not enough about the substance?
Well, here's the positive. You don't hear Kim in North Korea, yelling he's going to bomb or send a missile to the United States.
Well, they still have short-range ballistic missile tests.
But it's a positive. At least we've stopped.
But they haven't taken one nuke off the table yet.
I agree with you. We've got it. The focus has to be on denuclearizing. I think it's positive. We're having a conversation. The president's holding China accountable with the tariffs. Now, are we going to get a deal? I think it's going to be awfully difficult. I think it's positive what he did with Iran. I mean, you saw they've gone past where they're supposed to be on enriching uranium. So, I mean, they're not doing the right thing. So, but we do have to get something done.
But what about the other side of the coin and allegiances and what have you? And perhaps quite rightly in many people's eyes, NATO isn't spending enough money, and the president's taken Jens Stoltenberg and Frau Merkel and a lot of other people to task on this as well. But he seems to be trying to undermine a lot, or that's how his traditional allies from Canada to Germany to the United Kingdom may see some of his actions as well, because he seems incredibly robust with traditional democratic allies. I mean that in a democracy kind of way,
right.
And seems very friendly with, again, a lot of the people we just mentioned.
Well, the positive of this conversation, if you look NATO as an example. I just got a briefing on Saturday in Brussels. I mean, more countries are now hitting their 2% requirement, which is positive. There's more focus on the relationship with NATO. So I think that's a positive. Now the negative is what's Turkey going to do? Are they going to buy the S-400 missile system? So
you wouldn't sell the Turkish the F-35 on that note?
Absolutely not. And plus they're going to get sanctions. I mean, you can't play both sides. You can't say I'm part of NATO to deal with Russia and then buy equipment from Russia. You can't do that.
Picking up on Steve's point about the importance of building and preserving alliances, just in the last 24 hours on the China front, President Trump said we can't make a 50-50 deal. It has to be a deal tilted to the U.S. advantage. When you hear him say things like this and have a very outwardly America first policy, how can a country like the UK feel confident entering a deal with the U.S., feeling like they're going to get something out of it, given that he's very blatantly positioning himself like this?
Yeah, I think the difference is China is clearly competing with America. Their militaries, they're building a military and things like that. The UK has probably been, our best partner, for decades, century, whatever, in fighting for freedom and democracy worldwide, being our partner in dealing with things like Afghanistan and Iraq and things like that. So I can't imagine that we're not going to be able to continue to grow trade with the UK. I think Brexit, if it happens, which appears it will, hopefully that we'll have more trade with America.
Now, what exactly is the U.S. going to offer? In your view, what can they offer to the UK? President Trump made clear that when he was here for his visit that, the U.S. would like access to the UK's agriculture. At one point, he said the access to the UK's national health care system. I mean, what can the UK get from the U.S.?
I think what the UK and the American can do for each other is more service industry for both. I met with the Mr. Fox, head of Board of Trade, yesterday, and talked about how we can go state by state and work to try to get some of those regulations and permitting processes fixed, so UK companies can do more business on the service side, and American companies can do the same thing here. I think that's where the big opportunity is.
Senator, it will not have escaped your notice that this year we have a Venezuelan president of OPEC. And just tying in two themes which you're stunningly familiar and well briefed on as well. One, the oil story and the resurgence of the U.S. oil industry, and two, the tragic situation, which I've read many of your comments about in Venezuela as well, and you referenced the death of a 49-year-old naval captain. I think he died 15 hours after a court appearance. A tragic death there as well. But do you believe that OPEC is supporting Venezuela too much, or actually OPEC needs to be more aggressive with Venezuela? I mean, how do you read that situation at the moment?
Everybody ought to be more aggressive with Venezuela. Maduro is a pariah. I've been to the Venezuelan border. You talk to the mothers there. Their children are dying because they can't get food, they can't get clean water, there's no medicine, you can't go to a hospital and survive. So anybody that's doing business with Maduro, every country ought to have more sanctions. Everybody, we've got to get Maduro out of there. There's genocide going on there, and that's a short-term problem. A long-term, this is Syria. Russia, China, Hezbollah, Iran, they're all there. All the bad players are there, and we're going to have a Syria right in the southern hemisphere.
So I mentioned your links with the oil industry as well. Is this a situation that actually would just prove very beneficial for the U.S. oil industry if they were to go in and take over that infrastructure and of course, reclaim some of those assets that were taken off them by the Maduro regime?
I don't think about it that way. I think about how do we get Maduro out? Whether it's an American company or another company, that's not...
But you understand the point that some of the cynics are making, that it would be much to the benefit of the U.S. oil industry if they were to go back in and take over that infrastructure.
Absolutely. But if you stop and think about it, there's genocide going on. I mean, I've got a 3-year-old grandson. If he was living there today, his mom would be telling him, hey, Eli, you don't have any food today. I mean, that's what's going on every day, and it's intentional. It's not because of some weather-related issue. It's a man that is killing these poor kids. We have all got to stand up against this guy.